Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Brian Murphy. The Carolina Hurricanes exited the playoffs for the seventh time in a row without making it to the Stanley Cup final. That's raising questions about what the Hurricanes might do in the offseason and whether Coach Rod Brindamore's system is a fit for the postseason. WRAL's Sports' Pat Welter has been following the Hurricanes this entire postseason, and he joins us today to discuss the Hurricanes. Obviously, this season ended in disappointing fashion, losing to Florida again in the Eastern Conference Final. A lot of talk nationally sort of about Rod Brindamore, his style, and whether this team has sort of reached its ceiling, maybe gone as far as it can go. You've been covering the entire playoff picture. What's your take on the style, this team, and its future?
I would say it like this. The system isn't broken. It just needs a tweak. Right, like, talking to Rod throughout the season, talking to some of the players we heard from today about the system. I mean, they kind of laugh when they get asked that question because they're like, this isn't like football with like the wing tee or like a spread offense. Like, it's all pretty similar. And the Florida Panthers were the exact example of somebody that's trying to do almost the exact same thing as far as like heavy forecheck, tight defense in the neutral zone, getting your defense up in the play. These are all things that the Canes try to do. They just did it even better. So I think for the Hurricanes, it's just, they had an influx of young talent this year, kind of a reload to take a step back, to take a step forward, kind of a season. Even Rod said a couple of days ago he wasn't sure that this group was going to make the playoffs. So we saw Jackson Blake step in, and be a productive goal scorer in the NHL as a true rookie. Logan Stankoven, another true rookie, step in, and then Alexander Nikishin. So they've got like some young guys transitioning in. I think they need to make some moves in the free agency to add some more scoring and skill.
Yeah, we'll certainly get to free agency and the outlook ahead. But when you look at, have fans in some ways been spoiled by the success? There was a long drought for this franchise where it didn't go to the playoffs. Then all of a sudden, 7 years in a row, they've reached the playoffs, reached three conference finals during that time, and it just seems like everyone is kind of ready for that next step. We'll get to what it will take to get to that next step. But this is a team that, as you just mentioned, wasn't really even expected to be here,
right,
given all the losses they had last offseason.
I think it's like the evolution of a fan base in real time, right? Like, I'm from the Northeast, born in Pittsburgh, kind of raised outside Boston. And, those are harsh fan bases that want to win every single year. And if you lose in the playoffs too many years, you get fired. And kind of like what we're seeing here in Raleigh is like the evolution of a fan base where it was just happy to be there at the beginning to now expecting this to now where like even being in the Eastern Conference Final wasn't even necessarily something to be super excited about. So in a way, Rod Brindamore is a victim of his own success. But when you step back from it and you look at what's happened since Tom Dundon stepped in and Rod Brindamore and the new front office with Don Waddell, it all basically started with that first playoff run, 2018-19, 7 straight years, each year making at least the second round, 3 Eastern Conference Finals during that stretch. So yeah, you can get caught up in the fun, 15-game losing streak in the ECF. We were talking about it earlier, one of those rounds was before literally anybody was here.
Right.
And then, the first year is the first year of this playoff run where you are happy to be in the ECF. And yeah, now they've had 2 straight versus the Florida Panthers. They finally beat them.
At least once.
Snap the streak so we don't have to talk about it anymore. That's the standard. And I don't know. I just kind of think about teams in other sports, just to relate this to other things. Are the Ravens and Buffalo Bills not great teams because they're having to go through Patrick Mahomes? You know what I mean? Sometimes you just run into a great team. It gives you an example of what you need to do to get better. And I think the Carolina Hurricanes know as well as anyone what they need to do.
To be fair, those teams are also facing that criticism of when are you going to break through? And I think that's natural when you have a team that's been as good, won as many regular season games, won as many playoff series. When are you going to break through? We had some exit interviews with Carolina Hurricanes players and found out sort of the depths of some of these injuries. I mean, it's easy to say, well, they lost 4-1 to the Panthers. Well, 2 of their top 6 defensemen were hurt. Seth Jarvis found out today is still battling a shoulder problem that he's had for over a year. Mm-hmm. This team had to integrate 2 rookies at the blue line in the final playoff series. It does give you an appreciation for what these guys go through.
Yeah, I think you could step back and look at this. As much criticism as Brindamore started to face, at least at the beginning of the Panther series when they're down 3-0. But when you step back and look at the season on a whole, it might be his best coaching job. Like when you talk about all the pieces they lost, and I think specifically the defense, like everyone wants to look at the skill and the scoring, and yes, Carolina lacks a certain high end in that regard, but the system, and Rod's system in particular, relies so much on the defense getting up into the play and then being able to recover. And some of their better teams, they've had a lot of defensemen scoring goals as well. And so we've seen a true changing of the guard in real time of what they're doing defensively when they lose Brady Shea, Brett Pesce, who were not only great locker room culture guys, but fit perfectly into that system. We saw Brady Shea score a lot of goals here. So you lose those two guys entering the season, and then within the playoffs themselves, to lose the two guys that you learned to count on this year, Jalen Chattenfield, who's still a young player, and Sean Walker, who was a new guy. I mean, that can't be overstated how much of a difference that was. And, it's really interesting to hear just like Brent Burns talk about how big of a loss that was and how much they had to adjust to it. And, talking to Alexander Nikishin, it's like, okay, we know you don't speak English, but just say anything, say something. So, I think that's huge. It can't be understated just how much of an adjustment this team made throughout the year. Like, it's like, okay, beginning of the year was lose the defenseman, lose some other key pieces. Then there was the trade deadline period where they lost Natchez and Drury, had to totally rework their power play with Mikko Rantanen. Then he doesn't want to be here. He leaves. You get another new piece in Logan Stankoven, Taylor Hall. And then even those guys are seamlessly integrated by the playoffs. So it really is incredible when you look at it on the whole. The end is disappointing, but the journey, I think, ultimately was a success.
We're going to take a break on the podcast, but continue here on the video. When we come back, we'll talk about moving forward, what this team can look forward to. All right, Pat. This team enters the offseason with about $30 million in cap space and not a ton of roster holes. Most of their forwards are re-signed or signed long-term. On defense, Orlov and Brent Burns are free agents, but Nikishin and Scott Morrow look like ready-made replacements, at least for the time being. You may want to add some depth there. And both of their top two goalies are under contract for $4.75 million total. So that position looks well taken care of. They've got a couple prospects at goalie as well. You look at that $30 million and you start to dream a little bit on what they could add to this team that might get them over the hump in the Eastern Conference Final.
Yeah, Brent Burns and Dmitry Orlov both sounded like they wanted to come back, but they're both at the salary numbers that they are at, which is about $8 and $7 million respectively, is probably not going to fly at this point in their career. So if they are going to come back, I would expect it to be certainly at a lower number. And you look at that total number that you mentioned, $28 million. That's one of the highest potential cap spaces the Canes have had, and their front office has shown a real creativity in the ways they will work the cap. Even when they didn't have cap space. What Tolsky did in his first year at GM, I think, said a lot about what the Carolina Hurricanes have to look forward to in the future. So I think they've already shown us what they want to do. They traded for Jake Gensel last year. There was an opportunity potentially to bring him back. They didn't meet a salary number. He ultimately leaves for another opportunity in Tampa. They were willing to throw everything and Mikko Rantanen to keep here, had the foresight to trade for him early in the deadline period, give him kind of a 3-week trial run to see if he would sign long-term, and then made that really difficult decision to not, you could have, kept him and gone for the cup, right. Even if he was unhappy, you still got to play, and instead, they turn it over for more assets, they get Logan Stankoven back in the deal, so they've shown a lot of creativity, a lot of foresight, and they know everything the fans are saying is not new to them. So I'd expect them to acquire some more skill. I'd expect them to look for some more physicality. We've seen them do that in the past. They brought in Michael Bunting. That didn't exactly work out. They've tried to bring in guys like that before. So, if you look at some of the names out there, Mitch Marner is the big one.
Right.
Are they going to be able to land that?
From Toronto.
Yeah, one of the top line scorers in the world that's been playing alongside Austin Matthews.
Has also dealt with one of the same issues that the Canes has, though.
Topping out in the playoffs.
Right, productivity in the regular season, not productivity necessarily at the same level in the postseason. You mentioned Burns. We'll stick on Burns for a couple things that I want to get to that you talked about. Rantanen and the deal to Dallas. Dallas ended up in the same spot the Hurricanes did. They lost 3-1 in the conference final. But they gave up a lot of assets to acquire Mikko Rantanen, who was good at times in the playoffs, was really good at times in the playoffs. But was kind of quiet in the Edmonton series. And so I think, Carolina's almost in a better spot now, given that trade with Dallas. You look at Burns, 40 years old, has an iron streak going where he's played in X number of games. You look at bringing him back, and maybe Morrow needs a little more seasoning in the minors. But I think their additions have got to be bigger than bringing Brent Burns back.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's like, I don't know who the names are, like Aaron Eck. Like, you can kind of just go shopping on the Florida Panthers. Like, Brad Marchand is going to be a UFA. That would really solve some of your, like, kind of get like a pesky kind of guy in here, some toughness.
He is 37. He's going to be cup chasing, you would imagine, at this point in his career. And so he could be a guy to come in. And I was very impressed with him during the series. Like,
totally.
I thought, maybe he's done. No, he is not done. He's got a lot left.
And that's the kind of guy that they've shown a track record of being able to get in free agency. Like, are they going to get Mitch Marner? Like, if I'm going to predict it, I'd probably predict he goes to a bigger market with the highest possible salary number. And then even if you're the Hurricanes, you look at him, you're like, well, would really want to bring in a guy that's got like question marks about his playoff performance? I mean, I think that might be overstated. It's hard to take anything the Toronto media says with a grain of salt, right? Like, it's the harshest market up there. But Aaron Ekblad's another one. You're talking about defense on the Florida Panthers. So you're just kind of going down the list. You're like, well, I like him, I like him, I like him. So that's at least a place to start.
Well, both Toronto and Florida, who played in the playoffs, Florida won Game 7, beating Toronto, have a lot of free agents on both of those teams.
Yeah.
And you think, haven't studied the cap too closely, but you think it's going to be tough for them to bring back all of them. Sam Bennett, another guy who's a free agent in Florida. John Tavares, who played longtime Islander, has been in Toronto the last few seasons. He's another free agent. So and given the cap situation for the Hurricanes, they will have the ability to go shopping. And we've talked about Tulsky has shown that he's willing to take some big swings to try to bring in those pieces that they need. Let's talk about Kotkaniemi for a little bit, because I think a lot of fans have pointed to him as he's the guy who's supposed to be the second line center, supposed to be the guy who you don't need to bring in a free agent because you have a second line center in Kotkaniemi. Kind of disappeared during the playoffs, was a healthy scratch in Game 2. We talked to him at the exit interviews.
Didn't say much.
Yeah. It was sort of what was left unsaid, I think, in some ways that I took away from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jesperi Kotkaniemi is one that I've kind of looked at, of leaning on people that know hockey better than I do, that I assumed I'm missing something. Because it's very rare that I notice him during a game. And, playing the center position, you have other responsibilities to do. And I think a lot of his ultimately end up being physicality, defensiveness, net front presence. But, like, the numbers just aren't there. And, like, if you're looking at, like, one of the biggest questions around this team has been, can you win the Stanley Cup if Aho is your top line center? You could debate that another time. You certainly probably can't win the Stanley Cup if Jesperi Kotkaniemi is, quote-unquote, your second best center. And the way the lines work here is a little different. Where like Jordan Staal is on the third line. I mean, he's a pivotal player. But you're kind of like going down the center depth when you've got an aging center in Jordan Staal that doesn't score a lot. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, a guy that came here from Montreal, like a highly touted prospect, kind of a long-term bet on an underappreciated asset. It just hasn't netted. So, they've already signed him long-term, so it's kind of like sometimes you just kind of like you get stuck with a loss, and what can you do? But, like, clearly the center position is a place they need to improve. It's just also, like, the most coveted position outside of goaltender in hockey.
Right. And we'll end with goaltender. Freddie Anderson was great in the postseason at times for long stretches. His health is always going to be the issue. He's back. He's re-signed for next season. Pyotr Kochekov is back as well. I would expect them to have much more of a job share, maybe 41 games apiece, I guess, in an ideal world. You keep both of them healthy and then have both of them ready to go for the playoffs. Can you win? The TNT guys talked after the game about, a second-line center, an offensive defenseman, which may be what Alexander Nikishin turns into, and then elite goaltending. Do you have good enough goaltending? We've seen throughout these playoffs that goaltending can come and go from one series to the next, one game to the next. Anderson and Kochekov, is that a good enough pairing to get where this team wants to go?
I mean, I was like, when I sat down with Tulsky at the beginning of the season, that was one of my first questions, was like, can you win the Stanley Cup with Freddie Anderson? Can you win the Stanley Cup with Sebastian Aho as your best player? His answers to both were yes, but also like, what is he really going to say at the same time? But I think they've kind of looked at it. I mean, I kind of go back to like your Mikko Rantanen in Dallas situation. Like, you can go all in, and it still might not net the same thing. So what the Hurricanes have done overall during these 7 years is kind of give themselves a chance every single year. And, like, like Winnipeg's goalie this year was the best goalie in the league, and then the playoffs, Hellebuck kind of like imploded.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Ottinger earlier in Dallas, so like even you could think you have the guy, and then find out you don't have the guy at the worst opportune time. Now, what concerns me with Anderson is like the history, track record, and then the combination with Kochetkov and just like his completely erratic style of play. It's a little bit concerning, but I think just seeing Anderson be the best statistical goalie through 2 rounds, and then once he sat after the first couple games in this series, didn't go well versus the Panthers, seemed to find his legs again, was a positive sign to me. Is it enough? I don't know, but under like their current structure, it's like trying to find a quarterback. Like you'd love to have a better one, but like where's he going to come from?
Right. He shut out in Game 4. Anderson played really well. You talk about, we'll wrap with this, but you talk about putting yourself in the position is kind of what we talk about in the NCAA tournament, right? You give yourself enough chances, and maybe one year it's Florida that suffers 2 injuries along the defensive line and not you that suffers the 2 injuries. If you keep giving yourself a chance, maybe you get the bounce, you get the puck that trickles in the net, and their goalie can't make a save. So I'd much rather be in this situation than missing the playoffs 9 years in a row and talking about, the future of the franchise. I think the Hurricanes are in a great spot, not only on the ice, but off the ice with some of the stuff they're doing at PNC, Lenovo Center, and the development around it. This franchise is in an ideal spot, exactly where you'd want to be. Ton of cap space, nucleus is all signed. Now you're looking at adding some pieces.
I mean, it's hard to like build through free agency and through trades. And I think like if you look at the Hurricanes like hitting their head on the ceiling here, it kind of goes back to like what they netted in the bad years, right? Like you look at like the key players they've got through their draft process, Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, Seth Jarvis, like they didn't ultimately land Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. They didn't land an Austin Matthews. You look at Avalanche, who won the Stanley Cup out of the rebuild. They get Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can't like just grow those players out of thin air. So, I think what the Hurricanes have done with what they do have, I should mention Jacob Slavin as well as one of their building blocks. So, I mean, they've got some great pieces, but I think what we've seen is they're running into better ones. Like, I watch, like, even if the Carolina Hurricanes had gotten past the Florida Panthers, you watch the Oilers.
Right.
I don't think they had the horsepower to meet them, and I think the Dallas Stars probably would have been met a similar fate. So it's hard to, like, when you don't hit on those pieces, it's hard to just manufacture it. But when we've got the new pieces coming in now, Jackson Blake, Alexander Nikishin, like, and Bradley Nadeau maybe too.
Right.
Like that's the way they take the next step. You got to hit on another prospect. You got, maybe it's not going to be a top draft pick because they're not drafting at the top of the draft anymore. Right. But Darren York has a great track record. He drafted Seth Jarvis and Alexander Nikishin is finally here. So that's what you just got to bank on. Like you kind of have to get lucky.
Pat Welter, thanks so much for talking Hurricanes with us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. For more in-depth reporting on the Carolina Hurricanes, go to WRAL.com. I'm Brian Murphy, and thanks for joining us. And thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get the WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for your day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.